Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Shalise Sansola. This is Cults to Consciousness, and this is an episode of what we would call Culty News. We are discussing the Mormon General Conference, aka the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It is something they do twice a year, where the prophet, the president of the church, and his apostles, and some of the 70, the higher-ups in the church, they give talks, and they talk about things that are supposed to be revealed by God, new policies, or anything they want to impart upon the members for them to keep in mind, inspirational stuff usually. So we're talking about our thoughts, opinions of the themes of these topics. We will get into specific people and who said what, but mostly we're going to be talking in overall terms. So joining me, I have the fabulous ladies, Julia from Analyzing Mormonism. Hello, hello. And we have
Hi.
who also does her own social media, Ex-Mormon content. We've done episodes with her on trad, wifery, lots of good stuff. All of their videos are in the link below. So after this, if you're more interested in these beautiful ladies, you can go check out their interviews. So thanks, guys, for being here.
Thank you.
They were
I'm so excited to be part of Culty News.
I texted them like 2 days ago and I was like, can we cover General Conference? So Julia over at Analyzing Mormonism on Instagram and YouTube, she does these synopsis videos and she watches conference, so you don't have to. So can we all have a moment of silence for Julia? For the hard things. So if you guys are watching live, thank you so much for being here. If you have questions, please leave them in the comments. Jonathan is starring the comments. We will take questions after a few minutes, and we love to hear from you. Hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. We're almost at 300K. So exciting. And before I forget, these two lovely ladies are starting their own podcast. We want to talk about it for a sec?
Julia?
Oh, I think you should take it.
Okay, well, I'm so excited, and we've been kind of holding off on making this announcement. So, Shalise, you're the first one who's actually broaching this topic. We've been working behind
Cats
the
out of the bag.
scenes. We've kind of come together as a group of females in a very masculine space, talking about religion, talking about Mormonism, and we wanted to carve out kind of a softer space. So we are launching this week our Under Her Eye podcast, which will be deep diving into not just Mormon issues, but zooming out just a little bit, leaving Mormonism in the frame at times, but also diving into patriarchy, politics, and all things that affect us ladies. So that'll be Julia of Analyzing Mormon, obviously, and myself. I'm Jennie of Life Take Two. And we also have Beth Magnetic from Death by Patriarchy, which was formerly Mormon True Crime. So
cool.
It's like a girls' party all the time.
So awesome. Can't wait to see more of that, and let us know when it officially drops. We'll put the links in this description. So if you're watching the replay, you can find it. So General Conference, there are 2 sessions, right? Saturday and Sunday. When I was growing up in Mormonism, it was like you buckle in, you sit in front of that TV, and there were so many things to keep us kids awake, right? Like the bingo cards,
Right.
writing down in your journal, like write down your thoughts and you bring it to church the next day. And it's kind of like a virtue signaling of, well, did you watch it? Because I have all of these notes that I took on conference. Yes. So basically just a whole bunch of people get together, mostly guys. They do have a few women speak, but they give these little excerpts, these talks about what they want the general membership to know and or do. My thoughts overall, and if you read the description or saw the thumbnail, it felt very much like, holy crap, everyone's leaving the church. We need to figure this out on how to keep people in, how to make more babies, and how to bring back the apostates who have left. So that was like the major overarching theme to me after watching your videos, Julia. What are you guys' thoughts?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was feeling too, is that people are leaving, so they're trying to get people to go to the temple, or to have, there was one speaker that said, let's give people callings that don't have callings or don't want them. That's another way to keep people in, giving them jobs. So yeah, that was very much a theme through the whole conference. And yeah, I don't know if you made this specifically clear, but it's 10 hours. There's 5 sessions and it's 10 hours of conference. So yeah.
And I've watched all of those twice now, except for the Sunday or the Saturday evening one. Julia, I've watched every single session twice. So in between the sessions, I re-listened to the sessions, stayed up until 3
Oh my
o'clock
goodness.
Sunday morning, and then also listened to a couple of commentaries on it. So I listened to conference more this time around than I ever did as a member.
I was going to ask you that.
And that's what's so funny. I want to hear you guys' perspective. I have not listened to I will 100% admit I did not listen to it. That's why I brought these ladies on, because I just could not, I do not have the bandwidth to do that. So I'm curious your perspective. Listening to it as an ex-Mormon, it seems like a totally different world, because when you're in the church and you hear these talks, you get choked up. You quote, feel the spirit. You're like, wow, that was really touching. I want to be a better person. But you tend to miss all the blatant propaganda right in front of you. And so when you watch it through a new lens, understanding their intentions, it certainly has a different view. And I don't want to be offensive to Mormons and saying, like, you're dumb. Why aren't you paying attention? I get it because I was there. And also, we are just here to offer a different perspective. So it's not like we're so obsessed with the church that we're going to watch everything and report back. We really, truly want to give other perspectives on what's being taught over the pulpit as truly something that is considered doctrine or something that you are supposed to follow. So, what are you guys' opinions on watching conference as an ex-Mormon versus a Mormon?
So for me, I think a lot of this comes through in my little videos. I make little 3-minute videos covering each session.
They're so great.
And I think you can see, like, people get mad at me that are active members of the church because, like, I come across as kind of snooty or whatever. But like, I see things differently. Like, for example, one of the speakers said, like, if you're tempted to leave the church, listen to the stories of somebody who hasn't left the church or people who haven't, then you won't leave. Like, it seems very circular reasoning. Like, it doesn't really make sense. And you don't really see that as a member, but as an ex-Mormon, you're like, can you answer some of our questions or concerns rather than just say, listen to the stories of people who stay and then stay? Or like, just, I don't know. There's just a lot of things like that where I can see that happening. And then, or the honesty, like as a studying historian, I'm getting my master's in history. I can see that they're leaving off some things. Like Bednar even said a few things where I was like, that's not exactly how it happened. Like, anyway, there's certain doctrine things or historical things that just are not consistent, and they play it off like it is consistent. Whereas a lot of ex-Mormons have studied these things and they know that that's not the case. But
Do you have that example in front of you that we could just talk about real quick?
For Bednar?
Yeah.
So Elder Bednar, he said, oh, here, let me pull up my...
I feel like Elder Bednar's second speech, his talk on Sunday, was AI. Like when you watch those, like the totally computer generated videos on TikTok that we're all like so addicted to, he felt so AI to me. It was so robotic. There was no emotion. And I almost felt like the church had AI like write out the Joseph Smith story, the first vision, the gold plates, all that stuff, and then just like script it, do a little robotic video. And they're just like testing the rebranding of the Mormon church and Elder Bednar because it wasn't spectacular. His second talk, anyway, he's a little bit AI for me these days.
If that's the case, and I don't know if we can verify that, but one of the talks,
I don't think it's true, but that's what I felt like.
Oh, okay, because Suarez warned against AI. He's like, do not use AI images or content. And so I thought that was interesting. So going back, the thing that Bednar would said that caught my attention, I think it was Bednar. One of the speakers said that Joseph Smith taught that God the Father and Jesus Christ have bodies of flesh and bone, whereas before 1835, Joseph didn't have that rhetoric. Joseph Smith changed his views on the Godhead, where in the lectures on faith, and that's consistent through all the lectures, he says that God has is a personage of spirit. He doesn't have a body of flesh and bones, and only Jesus does. And so that's something Bednar was just using his later. Joseph Smith did say later that he did, but not earlier. So he's just kind of like, let's just not pay attention to what Joseph Smith said earlier. Let's just pay attention to what he's saying now, or was said at the end of his life. So just things like that were not historically consistent.
Right.
So can I share my thought on that?
Yeah, go for it.
Now that I've listened to 20 million hours of conference over the past couple of days, I thought that we were a church of living revelation. And when the prophet Joseph Smith died, then the baton of seership and revelation was supposed to have been passed on to Brigham Young and on down to President Nelson. So it seems like if you were the true living church of Heavenly Father, rather than going back and quoting what did Joseph Smith say, and what did this guy say, and what does history from 100 and almost 200 years ago say, I would love to see just President Nelson at the end say, well, let me tell you the nature of Heavenly Father. He doesn't have a body, and Jesus does have a body. I saw them in the temple last week because I am the prophet. And that's how revelation is supposed to work. And it really kind of underscores the fact that we haven't had revelation like that since really like Joseph Smith. Like he was the only one. Of course, there are like some really isolated events where people have said that they've seen God and Jesus Christ since, but not really. You know, if we're a living church, President Nelson should have been, let me clear this up for you. Mic drop, boom.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and that's something that I expected as a kid as well. We would all sit there excited to be like, what did God say? What are we supposed to do now? Tell us. Because we were told that the prophet is literally having conversations with God and Jesus. And so everyone's expecting these big revelations. And what we've gotten over the past few years, as far as I'm aware, nothing was revealed, nothing new was revealed in this conference. In previous years, it's, well, we can't be called Mormon anymore because it's a victory for Satan, or these policies that are harming LGBTQ people and their families. Nothing of real substance, or even like, hey, there's about to be a big pandemic, stock up on toilet paper and hand sanitizer. Instead, he says, take your vitamins. And people are like, oh, he knew. I'm like, no, if he knew, he would have been like, hey, a pandemic is coming. You can be
Right.
specific if you know what's coming. But that wasn't the case. So, yes, I agree that a lot of people are wanting, they're sitting on the edge of their seats wanting more. And what they're getting instead are the things that we're talking about. So I think let's go into those themes a little bit and get more specific. The first being the population control. That was the main thing that stood out to me. And I think to you too, Jennie, as we were speaking before, is they're really harping down on women's reproduction and telling women what they need to do with their bodies, specifically when it comes to having children. If you're 17, don't worry, have the baby. If you had a child out of wedlock, don't worry, you should have the baby and we'll adopt it. Just all of these stories of have children and put them into a gospel home where the child belongs with a father and a mother in the nuclear family that they so much promote. So, Julia, can you take us to a few specifics? Talk about the person who gave the talk, and then more about what they said.
Yes. So this was shocked me because this is Saturday evening. This is the very first talk Saturday evening. And this is Neil L. Anderson who gave this talk about abortion. And he told a story of this teenage girl where she had been not active in church and she was becoming active. And then he said that she learned that she was sick. And instead of being sick, she was pregnant. And then her boyfriend said, please abort the baby. And she said, no, I'm not going to do that. And luckily for her, she had a ward that was very welcoming and a ward that was very giving. And so they welcomed in her and her newborn baby. And yes, sure, that's great. Not everyone has that opportunity or has those resources. And he just kept going about how the church doesn't believe in elective they oppose elective abortions. He did say that they give a few allowances, I guess, for like, yeah, exceptions of like, I can't remember what he listed specifically. I'm imagining like incest or like the health of the mother,
Yeah.
and things like that. Yeah. So, but like it was very specific, and I have such a passion again for women's rights, and women will never have full rights over themselves if they don't have a right to abortion, like consistently across the board. That's my opinion. And I did not like this at all. This talk was very harmful. This is a white man speaking. He has never been pregnant. He will never be pregnant. I just think that men should not be making this decision for women.
He had a really interesting take on why not to, though. And this was something that I've never heard dialogued before, because in any of the conversations that you have around abortion, and again, I know that we're diving into like a really sensitive topic. I don't ever share really my feelings on abortion and whether or not that's something that I would do, because I think that that's really private. I believe, though, that every woman should have access to that decision. You don't have to have an abortion. Nobody's forcing you to. You don't have to believe in abortion, but you should believe that the ability to care for one's own body and to make those choices should be available to all. So I never like to get controversial whenever we talk about abortion. But whenever you do hear dialogue around abortion, it always comes down to, when does life begin? And this is something that, it's not new. We didn't just start this with the last election. We have had this debate over abortion, especially in America, for many years, because the Catholic Church, for instance, says that life starts at conception. The minute that ovum is fertilized, then you have a life form that should not be aborted. That is when the soul comes into that little embryo. So that has always been kind of the debate. This talk kind of spun it in a different way. He even addresses that. He goes, I know there's a lot of conversation about the beginning of life and whether that's at conception or at birth, but my argument for not having abortion is simply that there are countless spirit children in God's pre-existent state right now who are desperate to come down to earth, and like kind of the inference, so I don't think he necessarily said it, that they're desperate to come down to LDS families so that they can have the gospel in their lives. He did talk about, that theme throughout his talk. And so if you choose to have an abortion, then you are closing the door on one of Heavenly Father's spirit children's being able to access that life. So it was more of like every woman's body is a portal from the pre-existent spiritual world into this earth life. And if you close that door, that's where the real sin lies. So I found that was kind of like just a different, interesting take that I've never heard of, that we as women have that responsibility. So should we find ourselves pregnant as 17-year-old girls, we shouldn't abort, because all of our spirit brothers and sisters up there in heaven have to come down. Even if I'm a 17-year-old girl who has found myself pregnant with a boyfriend who's apparently abandoned me, because my ward is going to be there to support this spiritual brother and sister coming through my womb.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Jenny. Oh, sorry. I think you cut out for a second. I agree with you that it is a touchy topic, and I'm not saying that having the child was the wrong thing to do. Maybe it was the right choice for her. But I think what we're talking here is the option of the choice. That's the choice itself that's the most important. And I think that is a very slippery slope, that perspective of if you find yourself pregnant, it's your duty to have the child, because that layers on more spiritual abuse as well as the physical that the woman has to go through or the child has to go through to carry this baby. And it makes it more unnecessarily complicated to put these implications of it's your duty as an LDS woman or girl to have this child because they're just lining up to get down here. And it could also potentially, maybe this is a stretch, but I don't feel like it is, could lead to a situation where even if someone were assaulted, they could very well, in the Russian roulette, the bishop roulette, get a bishop who said, well, maybe this was God's plan. So now you have these compounding things where a girl just feels like that's her duty to have the child, and maybe God wanted that for her. And that could be a really tricky place to be in. Again, maybe it's a stretch, but I feel like in this current climate and what we've seen with bishops protecting predators and not protecting victims, that could very well be a possibility from this type of talk. Do you think I'm stretching or no?
Yes. And
I don't think you're stretching. I think that's great.
Yeah. On top of that, too, I just had like a lot of those thoughts as I was watching it. But I also had this feeling that I really wished that we could have a conference talk about pregnancy, chastity, virginity, abortion, without mentioning women at all. I want a talk where a man stands at the pulpit and speaks to the men. Like, young men, stop whatever behaviors you guys are engaging in that are getting these young girls pregnant and then causing the abortions and these hardships, because it takes two to tango, and there is no mention in any of these talks of the men except in one. There was one brief mention of I think that he put it as the delicate time when you find yourself unexpectedly pregnant out of wedlock, and that delicate situation that the mother and father find themselves in. And in that context, I found it really laughable, because the man really has no risk involved whatsoever. He might have to pay a little child support, where it really is a delicate situation for the woman. That was the only mention. I just want a church where those talks focus on the other half of what's causing the abortions and some of the other things that were talked about.
Yeah, definitely, because it's also fair to say that women are often blamed for SA in the church. And it's, well, why did you let it get that far? Well, why were you wearing that? Well, why were you out past midnight? Instead of also putting the men in the spotlight. Can we just briefly talk about, because I felt like, why would they tell this story about the mistress, Julia?
The mistress? Wait, did I miss the story?
Yeah, it's that same talk. Yeah.
The same talk? Maybe I missed it. Maybe I was too upset about the abortion. Jenny, can you say more about it?
Yeah, so at the end of that same talk, talking about how we need to bring all of Heavenly Father's spirit children from the pre-existence down to earth so that they can have bodies in a Christ-centered home. He wraps that talk up, and I guess it really hit me because my husband cheated on me over 100 times. So automatically I saw myself in this situation and thought how traumatizing and just really emotionally unhealthy and what a toxic standard this is for women everywhere. He said that a woman found out that her husband had been cheating on her. He had had an affair. And as he was going through the repentance process so that they could heal their marriage, not even a suggestion that they might divorce or might not be good for her in this talk at all. But as he was going through this repentance process, it was discovered that the mistress, who is a single woman, was pregnant. So the woman prays about what to do. She doesn't want this mistress to have an abortion. So she adopts her husband's mistress's baby. And he mentions in the talk how that, just this is what the power of the atonement does. When we are obeying Heavenly Father, when we are these portals that are giving these, earthly opportunities to Heavenly Father's spirit children, that we're blessed. And he's like, she raised this child lovingly as her own. And Heavenly Father just
Even
provided that
though
miracle for her. Yeah.
even though that child would be a constant reminder of her
Yep.
husband's infidelity. He said that. And I was like, okay, well, at least he's saying the obvious of, wow, that would be really difficult. First of all, I don't know if this story really happened. I don't know if any of these stories that they talk, almost every talk is just full
This
of
is
stories.
one that
And we're
I
like,
do have in my notes that this
did
story,
that
if this
happen?
story is real, then I want to see more documentation around this. This can't be real.
Yeah. I just feel like, wow, this is the story that they said, this is what we need to tell everybody about to make them realize that they have to do the hardest things possible when it comes to bringing children into this world. And I think even mentioned because they wanted the baby to be raised in an LDS family. And so it's just more of this superiority over other people. And wow, that baby really needs to be in the covenant, in Mormonism, to have the best chance. Again, just demonizing everyone who's not in it, or saying that they're not as good, or they won't be as good of parents to this child, or the child will have less opportunity, whatever it is. You could go on and on. But I just found it really interesting that that's what they chose, something that would be so heartbreaking for any woman. And they're like, yeah, but you got to buck up and deal with it. Not only should you forgive your husband, you should raise his child from his mistress. It's just like, wow.
Yeah.
It felt very Handmaid's Tale meets like Brigham Young meets Colorado City. Like, it doesn't matter who this baby comes from. Like, I don't know.
Also, his whole
Yeah.
talk seems to reduce women to just their role as mother and wife, maybe.
Yeah.
Like, it's
Mhm.
women have no outside purpose, it seems, except to raise children. Like, even if ones that they don't want to, or the pregnancy they didn't want, or things like that. Like, yeah, I just don't
But
like that.
it's also, they're just talking about the LDS women's roles, because did he mention the mother that decided to give up the baby, the mistress that gave up the baby? Now she has to live with that decision where she wanted to abort the child for whatever reason she may have had. But now she has to know that her guy's wife is raising her child. I don't know. Like, there's no talk about the emotional implications. There's no talk about any of the trauma that may come with this. It's just, at the end of the day, you have a duty to raise as many children in the gospel as possible. That's the message that I'm getting. Now, is it wrong that this child was born and raised in a good family? No, of course not. I just want to offer different perspectives on what this story actually implicates. So, okay, do you feel like we covered the women's reproduction and the population control? Were there any other talks that touched on that we haven't spoken on?
I think that was pretty good.
Julia, I felt like there was a broader theme that was kind of keeping women in that same role. Tell me if you agree with this too. I know that there's just a lot of dialogue right now in women's roles within the LDS Church, with Brother Halverson and his Instagram that kind of blew up the world last week. So women are talking about how they feel being Mormon. And it wasn't just that women were reduced to breeders for the church. There were also a lot of talks that had the theme of women waiting on men. There was one, Gerard Cosset, I can't pronounce his name, but he was the French 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about a sister he spoke to sisters who haven't yet found eternal companions, but he didn't talk about men who haven't had eternal companions yet. But sisters, those of you who have not yet found eternal companions, don't worry, Heavenly Father is going to give you an eternal companion. There was another man who told a story about a woman who cried out something mean to her husband. Julia, do you remember this one? And then the husband dies. And she tells this man, this is another, like, put this in the category of, is this story really true? So she tells this man, I think he was a 70. He says, the quote is, for 50 years, the widow felt guilt that her last words to her husband had been mean. So she's like nagging and says something mean to her husband, and then he dies. And for 50 years, she's carrying this guilt that she had said something mean to her husband, which I think just kind of underscores this concept that women are naggy and like she didn't have
silent.
Yeah, she didn't have like a good feeling about all of the wonderful things that she had said and done to him. He also told, that same general authority told a story of a 70 or 80-year-old woman who never married, and he kind of paints a picture of her wedding when she's like 80 years old and how that she had waited her whole life to get married. And even though she had to wait until she was this 80-year-old woman, and he describes like the white veil and her wedding dress and how excited she was. And I feel like that all tied into the new statue unveil on Temple Square that seemed to be what they had defaulted to as like the women's theme for General Conference. I felt like there were a couple of themes, and this was the one that they thought, this is really going to touch the women. And the statue that's been unveiled on Temple Square, for anyone who hasn't heard of this, is of the 5 virgins. The virgins that were waiting outside of the wedding supper for Christ. And it is kind of a beautiful statue. It's multi-ethnic. So there's a woman who looks to be African-American. There's one who looks to be maybe Polynesian. They all have, different shapes and sizes and heights and dress. And they're all in the circle. It's beautiful the way that they're supporting one another and holding their lamps out. Couple problems with it. It was done by a male sculptor who I feel like there's so many great artists within the church that could have done real female-centric sculpture, but also did they have to be virgins, and their claim to fame have to be waiting outside for Jesus? Again, I feel like the 5 virgins theme and a lot of the addresses to women were either about our wombs and our reproductive rights, or our intrinsic value comes from being married or waiting on a man. Waiting on Jesus, waiting on our husbands, waiting for that husband when you're 80. I feel it really highlights how the church does see women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Didn't you cover, Julia, in one of your posts, a talk that said, if you're not married yet, don't worry, you'll enter polygamy when you die?
Yeah, I think that was Kase, because he only, like you said, Jenny, he only specifically talked about the women not getting married, and then didn't say anything about the men. But in Mormonism, if a woman doesn't get married, she will enter most likely polygamy, because they say that there will be more women in heaven, and you have to be with a man in order to be saved. And so I added that as a joke. He didn't really say that, but he did address specifically that if a woman doesn't get married, that she'll have the opportunity to do it in the next life. Whereas the implication is that it's polygamy.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay. Do we have any questions before we move on to the next topic? Jonathan, what do we have here? Catherine, he didn't mention about the financial aspects of the pregnancy and delivery and legal costs. Yes, exactly. That's a funny thing too. When talking, I don't want to go on a whole tangent, but just a little tangent, is that when people think about, well, just have the baby. It's like, okay, do you know how much that's going to cost just to have the baby? Just delivery itself? How about, like, not to mention taking care of the baby? Anyways, I digress. Okay. Any other comments? What if the wife got pregnant by another man? Yeah, exactly.
Oh, thank you, Johnny, for asking this question.
Yeah. What do you guys think? What do you think they would have said in that scenario?
I'm just trying to put myself in like my marriage. If I had come home pregnant by another man, my husband wouldn't have been having that. I'd be out on the street.
I think, right. So something that's tricky in the Mormon church is getting a divorce as a woman, or you have to get it approved, a temple divorce or whatever. I feel like if you came home pregnant, the husband would have immediately gotten approval to divorce you. But I don't know if the woman would have gotten as easy of an approval if, the mistress situation had happened. They would have been like, sister, just forgive. Take the baby.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know if this is appropriate to say. But in early church history, Joseph Smith he has at least 35 to 50 or 40, polygamous wives, and 11 of those women were already married. And there's a story. There was I shouldn't say story. There are, what's the right
Historical
word?
documentation.
Accusations that Joseph Smith had his own personal abortionist. We don't know that for historical fact, but we know that this man, John C. Bennett, was an abortionist, and then he later claimed, and others claimed, that he was performing abortions for some of his wives that got pregnant outside of, because if Joseph gets a woman pregnant, that's problematic. If a woman who's already married gets pregnant with not their husband, that's problematic. But anyway, so there's this story, because one of the things that they said that Neil Anderson said is, he said, we've always been against abortion. Whereas if you look back at church history, that wasn't necessarily always the case. I do appreciate, though, somebody pointed this out to me, that the church used to see abortion as automatically you have to have church discipline. And I think they've changed that rhetoric on the website. As far as I know, is that is still like a softer thing. Maybe it'll change now that he's given this talk. I don't know. I'd be curious to see what happens in that
about that.
front. But
he said if you've had an abortion.
Oh, did he say?
Yeah, he talked about
forgiveness
if
can
had
be
abortion. Yeah, forgiveness.
Yeah, he did say that.
The blanket of the atonement will cover that, which was very different than what I heard as a teenage girl.
What did you hear?
We had a representative come into our seminary class from LDS services when I was like 14, 15 years old, and scare the living bejeebers out of me, because he talked about how that if you get pregnant, then that's already like the sin next to murder. And if you commit abortion, then you've actually committed murder. So you lose your eternal life forever. So it was one of the unforgivable sins. Like, as a teenager, you're not likely to commit a lot of sins, but I was likely to commit sleeping with my boyfriend. And, I guess abortion is on the table for a lot of teenage girls. Like, those are the big things. And yeah, he told us that would be the sin next to murder, and then actual murder itself, and that it was absolutely, utterly unforgivable. So then they left us little pamphlets, and they talked to us about LDS Family Services, and told us that should we ever find ourselves pregnant, that there was a placement program. And I actually had one of my friends, my senior year in high school, who did get pregnant, who was put into that placement program, where she literally went to some weird foster family just on the other side of the state for the 9 months that she was pregnant, totally away from her home, totally away from her family, couldn't attend church activities like Young Women's or anything like that. They just basically kept her in a basement. She had the baby. The church took it into the adoption program, and then she came back home like nothing had happened, but I knew where she was. So,
wow.
Yeah. Dang.
That's what I grew up with. I'm older than you guys,
school.
So.
No, there were kids in our school that did that too. They would just disappear and then come back a little sad, and you kind of just assume that's what happened. Yeah, really heartbreaking. So the next topic that we are going to go into, I think, is interesting about the apostates, us, people who leave, are actually secretly wanting to be Mormon again, which
Julia.
I just want to pull my hair out and be like, just say that you're not listening. Like, tell me you're not listening to us without telling us you're not listening, because it's like we have actual reasons why we left. It's sure, maybe we were also offended. Sure, maybe our word wasn't great. Sure, maybe we didn't have a good bishop. But that's not the reason that we left. There's so many other things, actual, provable, factual things about the truth claims, about the Book of Mormon, about Joseph Smith, about Brigham Young. Do I need to go on? So it's just kind of annoying that they're almost just like, don't listen to what they're saying, but bring them back to church because they actually want to be back.
Right. Yeah, and for reference, that was S. Mark Palmer who said that. He said people who left the church, this might not be exact wording, but he said essentially people who have left the church are secretly longing for faith. And again, this isn't accurate. I think we've all stepped away, the three of us, and we aren't secretly longing for the faith. We're not secretly wanting to be Mormon. We have legitimate concerns, like you said, and they've never been answered. The church can't answer them. So I didn't like how he characterized that.
Is he the guy who told the story about the tree?
He did tell the story about the tree, yeah.
The tree story made me so mad.
I tell everyone what the tree story is.
So Mark, so Elder Palmer, I think he's of the 70, but he said that he had a willow tree in his yard, and during a storm it fell over. And so he goes out with a chainsaw and he's going to just chop it up because that's what you do. And his neighbor comes out and says, no. The tree, see, there's some roots that are still attached to the ground. Just prop it back up. cut off the branches so that it won't fall over again, and so that the nutrients can go into the roots, and then just leave it, like nourish it and take care of it, and just see that it'll come back again. So he says that they did that, and he was like, this isn't going to work, this is going to die, but whatever. So they prop the tree up, do all the things, and then he showed an after picture where the tree is now flourishing, and it's all bright and great. It looks like a great willow tree. And so he was saying that in the sense of like how some people have fallen away or fallen down and can be picked back up and things like that. And like he was like encouraging people who have left the church to come back. And one thing that confuses me in conference is when they address people who have left the church, like they're watching conference, they're like, hey, if you've left, come back. And I like the very few ex-Mormons are actually watching conference and are actually getting this message. So I don't know if they say that more for the members. I thought that was interesting. Like I wondered why they do that. But.
Yeah, the people who are watching conference are the creators who are going to report on it, who have no chance of coming back.
Can I share a couple little quote nuggets from that talk? Yeah. Because he was talking about me. He was talking about you. He was like, Jennie Julia, Jennie, this was to us and to everybody like us who's not believing in the church anymore. He talked about the tree specifically as a sorry sight. He said in his New Zealand accent, I think that's why they let him talk so much, because he talks repeatedly and he's just a 70. Like he gives a lot of general conference talks. He has a really cool accent. It was a sorry sight, he said about the willow tree. How could a tree so obviously fallen and troubled ever come back to life? And even like the tone of his voice as he described this poor pitiful, and he had the pictures up on the screen and everything. It was a sorry sight. And I just thought, like, that's what he thinks about us, that we are a sorry sight. How could somebody like us, who's so obviously fallen and troubled, come back to life? I was just thinking, like, what the fuck the whole entire time? Am I allowed to say that on the show? So, and he says that when you discard your faith and belief, it's like worthless firewood. Oh no, you discard your faith and belief like worthless firewood. Those are the quotes there. And then, go back to church, act like it never happened. So I call total BS on this. And I just wonder, like, if you guys are longing to get your faith back, because I am not. Like the heavy price that the one dude in the story received by leaving the church, that was inflicted by hateful members and loss of community. It wasn't because he had a loss of faith or a separation from the Holy Ghost. The things that we lose when we leave the church are like, my family doesn't talk to me anymore and I don't have like that support, but it has nothing to do with like inherently who I am. So I wrote down a couple of things that I've lost. I lost controlling men who think that they own me, my womb, and my purpose. I lost 10% of my income going to a $200 billion, almost $1 trillion organization. They say by 2040, it's going to be a $20 billion organization. I lost being labor trafficked through callings at the willy-nilly of my bishops. I lost sucky Sundays, and that's about it. That's what I've lost. What I gained was integrity, authenticity, and true joy. And there's no part of me that wants to go back to church. Not once. I walked out 6 years ago. I have never been back. In no way do I desire to go back.
Well, and also this talk achieves two things. One, it talks badly about people who have left, and it makes the members see us as a project to be fixed. And just the mere thought of someone thinking I need to be fixed makes me want to throw up, because I'm thriving, guys. Like, I'm doing well. No one needs to fix me. But it also accomplishes, and I know this because I watched the video you sent me, Jennie, the little clip on YouTube, and I was like, let's see what the comments say. It targets the people who are 1 foot in, 1 foot out, one root in, tree toppled over, because so many people in the comments were like, oh, this is what I needed to hear. I've been struggling with going to church. I think I need to go back. It's guilting them and making them think they're broken, sad sites, and who can fix them? Only the church. And so I noticed that it's trying to target the people who are already thinking of leaving by making them out to be sad, sorry, broken things.
Wow.
And I think it was reiterated again this last session, I think. I can't remember if it was Nelson, but somebody said like happiness is really only found in the church and the gospel. I can't remember if it was him or somebody else, but it's basically that same thing where it's like, if you leave, what happiness will you have if you leave? Because it's only found here. And so again, the guilt, like you have to stay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about apostates. Also, something that I noticed was a theme. Sorry, I don't have my little thing that makes this stay in, so I'm sorry if this is annoying me pushing back in every 5 seconds. It was very much don't leave. Don't talk to the apostates unless you're bringing them back to church, and just don't leave, guys. Don't look it up. Don't leave. Just faith. Don't leave, guys. And I thought it was really prevalent how they were just drilling it over and over into the people watching this to stay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do we have any specific examples that you had written down, Julia?
I feel like that was throughout the session.
Everybody.
Let me see if I have. Yeah, I feel like most people had that theme. Well, I don't know if it's appropriate to talk about this now, but I kind of want to talk about maybe it's along the same lines with Elder Razband. He talked about how some people who leave the church and have they're reduced to footnotes, but the Lord's plan will continue going forward.
Can we go there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes the leaders of the church, they label people who have left. I can't remember some of the specific names, like decommissioned temple. I can't remember some of them. Lazy learner, lax disciple. There's a bunch of labels that they give us. And so I guess
then you have to stay on the boat, like somebody like jumped out and drowned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like so now footnote. Yeah. So now footnote is another name that they're giving people who have left the church. And one thing that I thought it was really funny, somebody shared this with me, and as a studying historian, we talk about footnotes and how that's really important to point you in the direction of truth or historical facts and things like that. And the church often hides things in their gospel topics essays. For instance, like polyandry, I think is only found in the footnotes. So some of this critical information is only found in the footnotes. And so I just think that was interesting that they're calling people who leave the church footnotes, where this is where the accurate information is coming from. I just thought that was funny. I don't know if you had more to add on that.
It's a compliment. We'll take it.
Right?
But what was the context? What was he trying to say, that people who are in the church are like the pages in the Book of Mormon, and then we're just, ignore them.
You're reduced to mere footnotes. That was the quote.
Yeah, I can't. He was talking about like the gospel overall, and he was talking about how the church was growing, which I thought was really funny, because he was like, oh, it's just growing exponentially and things like that. But if you look online, you'll see a lot of that's not always the case. Like they're demolishing church buildings, they're selling them, they're closing stakes, the numbers are decreasing. So it's just really interesting how he's trying to play it off as one way that the church is growing, but in reality, it's really not growing. I don't even know if it is growing. If it is, it's a very small percentage.
It is, and 173% of the current growth is in Africa. I have some friends whose children and nieces and nephews and people who have gone to Africa, where they're baptizing 60 to 200 people at a time in one Saturday. So most of the church's growth right now is on the African colony, and I have so many problems with that. That could be its own separate segment on colonization and just the lack of context that people outside of America have for the church in general. So yeah, that's where most of our growth is coming from. We have very little growth in the United States. Of course, we don't know those numbers because the church doesn't publish them. And every year I call and ask if I can get a report from church headquarters about the people who've resigned from the church. And every year, this is my 6th year in a row doing that. Every year they send me all around and nobody ever gives me an answer. So I have yet to have an answer to the number of people leaving the church.
Yeah. So along that note, I was looking through my notes, and there was an elder, Hans T. Boom, that this seemed to be his theme too, where he's like, if you get offended, don't leave. And he told this story, and again, I'd like to know if this story is true, but he told the story of a man who was accused, I think he might have been a bishop, but he was falsely accused of a crime, I think, and then he was quickly released from his calling. And then later, he's like, but he didn't leave the church, he stayed in the church, and he chose not to be offended, and then, yeah, he wanted to leave, but he stayed anyway, and then the truth came out, and they found out that he didn't do this thing that he had been accused of doing. And so basically, it was just like, oh, don't be offended, and just stay anyway, and then throughout it just felt like he was saying, like, listen to the stories of the people who have left, take a page from their books and don't leave either. And so that just, for Boom's talk specifically, that one, it just seemed like a big theme.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, again, that they choose a story to the most extreme. Like, this bishop was accused of something, he was released from his calling, and you'd think that, whoa, he would probably leave the church over that. But no, he stayed. These are the extreme things that we want you guys to do. So if something small happens, it's nothing, because this guy got released from his calling as bishop and he stayed, so you can stay too.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so I think we need to talk about the president's talk, which I am pretty pleased with. Take
I
it
loved
away,
it.
whoever wants to.
Yeah, I loved it. Julie, can I start because you're gonna have all the good details?
Yes. Yeah,
I
go
was
for
doing
it.
like a best and worst on my TikTok channel. Like, what was the best theme? Not the best and worst people, because I'm an atheist humanist. All people are beautiful and wonderful and miraculous. So, but a best and worst theme. I felt that President Nelson's talk was my pick for the prize as being the best one in conference. And honestly, like, it gave me a feeling that this is what somebody who truly believes in Jesus and this gospel would look like. I felt like it was more kind and benevolent than some of the things that President Nelson has said over the past couple of years. And it just almost made me cry. Like, I've listened to General Conference just the way that I would have when I was Mormon. I was baking cinnamon rolls in my kitchen, taking them to my neighbors, a homeless man down in the wash behind my house, and a little single mom that lives upstairs from me. So I was kind of celebrating conference, and I was almost kind of like having flashbacks to my old Mormon self. And I got emotional when I heard President Nelson's talk, just because it was so refreshing to hear the leader of the church calling for kindness, compassion, and sympathy. So specifically, when he said his little quote that, Julia, I know that you're always better with the quotes than me, but he said, if those people that are online that are being kind and harsh, he says, I'm shocked when I get online and I see the contention and I see the argument and I see the hateful way in which members of the church, I don't know, parenthetically, probably Ward Radio and other people like that, are treating other members out there. And he says, that is not who we are as people. 2 years ago, I called on members to have more loving kindness, more charity, more compassion than ever before. And some of you have done that and some of you have not. And it breaks my heart to see those who don't. I had actual tears coming out of my eyes. True story, not made up, not just for drama. When I heard that, because that's something that I can absolutely get behind. I felt like it was a very healing talk. And I felt like instead of pointing his finger at women, pointing his finger at apostates, pointing his finger at people who oppose the church, he was using his role as the leader of this church to speak to the people that are following him and point a finger at the membership of the church and ask them truly to like look in a mirror and see what they can do better. So that was my pick for best in the lineup.
Yeah. What do you
Yeah.
think, Julia?
So I really like that too. I think you quoted that pretty well. I didn't write down exactly what he had said, but my notes say like, don't be hateful online and don't have contention. Don't demean others. And he says specifically, garnish your thoughts unceasingly with virtue. And then he talks about virtue and how like if you have impure thoughts, add virtue. If you are have depressing thoughts, add virtue and things like that. And so one personal experience that I've had with these, so I post my little takes on conference on all my channels, and I've had so far I've had the very first one I posted, one of my active Mormon friends reached out to me, and two of my friends who have never been Mormon, they reached out to me. They said, whoa, the people in the comments are being so mean. And the people in the comments are active members of the church. And so what surprised me is that, like, I think this is what Nelson is trying to go for. This is what my take was, is that when people see that, these non-members, they're like, whoa, Mormons can be really mean. And that doesn't put the church in a good light. So him saying, you guys always be kind, don't have contention online, don't fight with people, don't be like, just overall don't be mean, just be nice. Like that helps the church look better and it helps them be better and it helps it be a safer space. And so like there was a really good talk. I thought I didn't really have any criticisms about it. It's just that that he did say it earlier and he's having to repeat it again. And so I wonder if people aren't quite getting the message, which I get, if you feel like your faith is being attacked, people tend to come across as kind of mean. So I get that, but yeah, that's true. So I get where they're coming from. I also think that people can do better. We all can do better on whatever side of the faith spectrum we are on. So this was a really good talk.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's great that he's pointing out empathy and kindness go a long way. I do think it's interesting, and it does put people in a tricky situation because on one hand, you're supposed to defend the faith to the death, and that's really what people are doing. I think when I was Mormon and I would get defensive, I would be a little snarky about it. And I think it's because I believed it so strongly and I felt like an attack on the church was an attack on me. So absolutely, I can understand why people would be triggered and want to speak badly to whoever is criticizing the church. So it is interesting that of course you should be kind and have compassion. And so on one hand, it feels like, yes, of course, that's the answer. And on the other hand, it feels like you're telling the members, defend the church, but passively, and like push down those feelings that are really hard and ignore the fact that you want to lash out, which is also just going to kind of suppress feelings. I don't know. It's tricky. I'm just saying it's layered, and it's an interesting place to be in. And I would imagine a Mormon who does, like, the reason they do that is because they want to prove you wrong, right? And they want to be like, no, you're not getting it, you footnote apostate. But if you're not super Mormon, you probably won't do that. If you're not really invested, you probably won't go around Ex-Mormon pages commenting your thoughts. So it's an interesting place to be in, but I do love the fact that he is promoting kindness and compassion even toward us apostates, even if he didn't directly say it.
Right. There's a couple lines that I wrote down from him that I think are specific, where he says, hostility builds no one, and contention never leads to inspired solutions. And even like thinking about it from an ex-Mormon perspective, someone who has left the church, where I need to be careful in how I share any information that I have to my active members of the church, family, and friends. So I need to like not have hostility, not be contentious. Like if you use the word, now I know your channel is Cults to Consciousness, but calling the Mormon Church a cult, that's not really helpful. Like putting labels on Joseph Smith, it doesn't really help with the conversation. It doesn't really help with learning, because people automatically become defensive, and that's not a place of learning. That's not a place of inspiration, I guess. But
no, I agree. I know.
I do still call the Mormon Church a cult because it's categorized as one, but just that non-contentiousness, I think, is so important. So on this topic, I think that often the Mormon Church is in a quandary, because it is almost a tale of two religions. You have the Book of Mormon, which is very much like rivers running with blood and Ammon chopping off arms. And if somebody's holding on to gold or the brass plates that you need, then we're going to end their life with a sword. And then you have, on the other hand, the Bible, and the Doctrine and Covenants is somewhere in between. It's almost like a mashup of the two. And I did notice that in this general conference, there were almost no references to the Book of Mormon. Did anyone else notice that? Like, there were not a lot of quotes about Nephi. There were not a lot of quotes about going out and waging war. And in many ways, I think that President Benson, so I grew up with other prophets. It was Hinckley, Benson, Hunter, Monson, and Spencer W. Kimball, who were very much into the Book of Mormon. I feel like President Nelson is more of a Bible type of guy. And so he's leaning into Jesus and Christianity in ways that a lot of other prophets haven't. And he is kind of reining us in, because as a Mormon kid growing up, I was always confused. Well, am I supposed to like fight to death like the Book of Mormon says? Or am I just supposed to like turn the other cheek like Jesus says? And that's a conflict that the Mormon Church has always had. And I felt like President Nelson really just highlighted that we are leaning into the Bible. We're leaning into disciples of Jesus Christ, and kind of like a soft quit on the Book of Mormon, the thought that I had.
Interesting. I hadn't noticed that, because now that you say it. Yeah, I don't know that they quoted from the Book of Mormon very much. I think Jeffrey R. Holland talked about it a little bit, but I don't know that he quoted directly. I think he was just talking about I think he did. I think he quoted similarities between the Bible and the Book of Mormon, maybe in the preachings of Christ or something like that. I can't remember, but I think he did reference the Book of Mormon. But outside of that, I'm not sure other people did. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I have noticed they're rebranding to feel more Christian. I know a lot of people will argue they're not Christian because they don't believe in the Trinity. I'm not here to argue that. I'm here to say that the church feels like they're trying to present more as Christian and followers of Jesus. They changed their logo on maps to the Jesus thing. I think they're trying to present, we follow Jesus and not Joseph Smith. More so. So I think that's intentional to try and, water down some of the original Mormon teachings and make it a little bit more palatable for people who do love Christ and want to follow Christ. But that's just my opinion.
I agree.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
So what did we miss? Probably, I know there's 10 hours to cover, but as far as general themes, did we catch most of it? Were there any standout stories, Julia, that you had written down that you wanted to mention?
Dieter F. Uchtdorf talked about how people sometimes will, he talked about them coming back to church, and he says, what if, he asked questions like, what if they come to church after either not being a member or not being in there for a long time, and it's not the perfect day, where he's like, where in my perspective, it's like, what if, I think he was sort of saying like, what if the ward isn't as welcoming or it's not as friendly to non-members or less actives? And so he was like calling on them. He's like, just be patient with everybody. And he seems to be calling on the people to change and be more welcoming. So I thought that was really interesting. So, but I think it's, again, the sort of rhetoric of like trying to get people to come back, and how we as active ward members need to be better at allowing that to be a safe space. So I just thought that was interesting. I'm trying to look through my notes. Did you have any, Jennie, that you wanted to add?
I agree with that. I feel like there was a big love bombing theme. There were so many talks that really taught people how to love bomb better. And I love Victor. He's one of my favorites. He's almost one of those that like, does he really believe, or is he just there because like he feels like it's good for the world? And I just love his vibe. He seems like more of a moderate. He wasn't born and raised in Utah, so I've always been a huge Victor fan. His whole entire talk from beginning to end was, let's love bomb better, so that when people do come back, they're going to want to stay. And he had a lot of specifics. And also, who is the one who talked about having callings? And like, yeah, you should accept every single calling. Oh, that one actually tied into another, like, women are just subjugated to men talk. Julie, which one was that where he said that he didn't want to take that calling when he was a young man? He was like in college. He didn't want to do that. And then he served as the elders quorum president or branch president or something. And while he was doing that, they had an ice cream social one afternoon. And while he was serving ice cream, this cute girl comes through the line, and then she comes back again and she gets 3 servings of ice cream. And he's like, and now we've been married for 30 years, which just reinforces that doctrine of accept a calling, and then you're going to be rewarded with this virginal bride, which just drove me bonkers.
I don't know if was it Shumway?
Yeah,
I don't
what was
remember
his name?
who. I don't know. I can't remember if it was Shumway or not, but
yeah, there
but
was
also
a lot
that
of
reminded me
on that theme of just love bombing better. But I don't know. I guess that's maybe me being a little bit biased, because I was a Mormon and I did feel like I was always love bombing people. I wasn't truly loving people just because I wanted to be nice or kind or be serving ice cream or whatever. I was doing it for 2 purposes. I felt like I had to earn my way to heaven by accepting callings or being nice at church or whatever. So I was trying to get my celestial life ticket, that golden ticket to live with God. And I was also trying to make sure that I warned my neighbors so that they could also get their golden ticket to the celestial kingdom. Now that I'm no longer a member of the church, I love people simply to love people. There is absolutely no ulterior motive. I'm not trying to shine my light before anyone. I just feel like life is hard. And if I can make it a little bit better for my neighbor, or the homeless man on the corner that me and my family take dinner to all the time, or any of the other, my kids, whatever, I'm just genuinely doing it without ulterior motive. And I don't think that when you're inside the church that you realize what that looks like, because every minute of your life is shining the light or earning your celestial kingdom. So not to be like a Debbie Downer, but I did feel like that was the spin that a lot of the leaders were putting on it. We are going to love people better so that they will come back to church. We're going to make our wards friendlier and happier so that they will want to come back again. And on social media and online, we're going to be nicer so that the church looks good and people want to come.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have one. Yeah, I have one more story that I forgot, and I think Jennie, you and I talked about this off air with Jeffrey R. Holland. He told a story of a 12-year-old boy who had muscular dystrophy, and he was in a wheelchair, and he told the story of how he was. Yeah, and then how he wanted to. What's Easton? Oh yeah, Easton, mm-hmm. And how he wanted to pass the sacrament, and he didn't want any help. He wanted to do it by himself, and so he was able to do it, and it was like this beautiful experience for the whole ward and the bishop and everybody, and like. Yes, that's a great story. That great stories that are like this, that show like human kindness and human goodness, don't necessarily translate to mean this church is true. And I think the church kind of does that overall. Like if it's a positive experience, it means the church is true. If this thing is happening, it's great, the church is true. Whereas like it is a great touching story. It doesn't necessarily convey the messages that Holland was trying to convey. But it was a good story. I don't know if you guys had more to say on that, but
yeah,
I feel like he was inferring that if he hadn't had the gospel, that he wouldn't have had that happy story. Like he's only happy, he's in a wheelchair and he's only happy because of the gospel. That's kind of what I got out of it.
Well, it's something that we see a lot, and I think are the purposes of these random, maybe true, maybe not stories in these general conferences. It's to monopolize your emotions so that when you get choked up thinking about a boy who's trying to give the sacrament and is having troubles and triumphs. You get a tear in your eye, you think that that's the spirit, and wow, the church is true. So like you're saying, both of you, I think it's just a way to warm the hearts of people, but with the intention of, if they feel good, they'll stay. If they feel good, they think the church is true. And you know, it's interesting because if they wanted people to stay, I don't know, maybe proving the truth claims are true would be a way to do that. But they can't necessarily do that. And so they have to go about just telling you inspirational, warm stories to get you to want to stick around and come back and fill up your cup of feeling fulfilled again. So I feel like that's just one of the emotionally manipulative ways that they keep people staying. And again, I'm not here to say you should not tell inspirational stories. That's horrible. That's the devil's work. No, it's great. If you want to go to church and hear inspirational stories and have a tear in your eye and feel compassion and empathy and all of that, that's so wonderful. The point here is that it doesn't mean that the founder of the church is true because you feel a warm feeling. I can feel a warm feeling while watching a movie like The Notebook, but that doesn't mean The Notebook is true. It doesn't mean that story's true either. It just means that there are good writers who can get you to emote feelings and get you to feel a certain way. So yeah, I feel like that would be the overall theme of this, is just so many different stories to get you to reflect, either feel guilty or feel like you need to go back to church, need to be a better person, but with the intention of whatever their agenda is behind it. Maybe it is just to be good people, and I really hope that that's true. Maybe it's because they want more people to come back to church, have more babies, and give more money to the church. There are many different possibilities. We can only really speculate, but I feel like we covered everything. Jennie, did we cover everything that you wanted to talk about?
Let me look at my notes really quick. Yeah, I think that's, and Julie and I are going to do a really in-depth deep dive tomorrow night, where Julie is going to dive into some of the deeper topics here. But yeah, those were the only things that I'm still thinking about that are kind of bouncing through my head the whole time. I did feel like part of that theme, like with the Easton story and everything, was giving people a little bit of fear that you don't want to step away. So that Easton story, I think you were supposed to think to yourself, not only having those beautiful emotions, but what would happen if I didn't have the church in my life? And I had a child who was in a wheelchair and my ward wasn't there. If my daughter got pregnant and I didn't have the ward there. A lot of the stories that we heard overall, I think, were on the theme of causing fear of not having that community. So like, whether you believe it's true or not, I would be like, I found myself at the end of General Conference just kind of mad that I don't have that community anymore. Like these people have so much around them. And, I have about 10 friends and Kevin and a couple of teenagers who some days like me and some days don't. There was a lot of just marketing to the community and that gathering place for the members, which is powerful. Don't we all want to have that?
Yeah, when it's genuine, right? We all want that when it's genuine. The problem is when you leave the church, it goes away. They don't keep loving you, usually. That's not to say everyone stops loving you. There are people with good hearts that see through it, but for the most part, they're told to stop talking with you unless it's trying to bring you back to the church. And that's where it's so heartbreaking, because when you belong to something like that and you feel like these are your family, and then you leave and no one even bothers to reach out or ask you if you're okay or why you left, everything kind of crumbles. So yes, community is great when it's authentic and unconditional. Do we have any comments, Jonathan, questions from our viewers here before we sign off? We've already been going for an hour. Time flies. These ladies are brave and I applaud them. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you so much. Strong and brave. You guys are the best. So many people watching right now, over 600. That's awesome. Nice. Jennie, I hope you're feeling well. What a lineup.
Thank you. This is an hour and 3 minutes of Julia's birthday that you guys have gotten to spend with
us. Yes, it's Julia's birthday, guys. Say happy birthday to Julia and go follow her. And Jennie, too, of course. But she has sacrificed her time on her birthday to be here with us. Oh, man. Okay. Do we have anything else that we wanted to cover? I feel like we covered so much. You guys can let us know in the comments if you watched it or if you heard other creators and their synopses and you feel like we missed something. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And I think that's everything. What am I forgetting? Hit the like button, the subscribe button, and these two are releasing a podcast starting tomorrow. Guys, we need links to this so people can click on it.
Yes, we'll get them.
It's the Under Her Eye podcast. We're currently on YouTube with no videos up yet.
I need that link. So that, hold on.
Yeah,
Do you have
I'll send it over to
the
you.
at? Do you have the at right now?
Because Julia, what is it? It's Under Her Eye podcast.
Because I did search it and it didn't come up for me. So do you have the actual at, and we'll put it in the chat? Maybe Jonathan can do that.
Also, thank you everyone who's leaving comments wishing me a happy birthday. So.
Yay!
Yeah, it's the at Under Her Eye podcast.
At the Under Her Eye podcast.
Just at Under Her Eye podcast. At
Under Her Eye podcast. Okay, Jonathan, can you put that in the chat, please? Love you so much.
And, I'll be hanging out in the comments too. Can I tell you one question that I'd love to see in the comments? I would love to hear from you. How many of you would actually adopt your husband's mistress's child? That's all I care about. That's all I walked away from conference going, this is the unhealthy role model that we're giving to young women, that if I grow up and my husband cheats on me, I have to be willing to adopt his illegitimate child. It's
I do think
it's so extreme.
I do think that happened with Emma Smith though, right? With Vitamin. I think he cheated on her and she raised the child.
She did. Is that who he's talking about?
Right?
Going back to like
I don't know that.
I
don't know.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to hear. What do you get? What would you do? I would not. I absolutely would never.
Yeah, that's a lot. All right. Well, you guys are the best. Thanks for jumping on. Everyone go check out their podcast and their links. It's all in the description. Any final thoughts, ladies?
No.
My final thought is, Shalise, you're amazing. You're one of my favorites online. And I was so happy when you said that you wanted to dialogue about conference. So thank you. Thank you.
Oh, you're so sweet. Well, I think you both are awesome too. Can't wait to hear your podcast. Everyone go check it out. Guys, we are going to Mexico, and I am formally inviting you both to come to Mexico with us at the end of the year. It's going to be so much fun. We'll talk about it after the live.
That's so cool.
So our first vacation to Costa Rica went splendidly, and we're like, let's do it again. Round 2 in Mexico, the Oaxacan coast in Huatulco, Mexico. And we're going to be like island hopping and snorkeling and taking cooking classes and all that fun stuff. So anyways, check it out. Link is in the description. Yeah, we'll chat. We'll chat after this. Maybe I can get these ladies to come with.
I'll look at the link.
Yeah. So if you guys want to,
I'm so glad you're doing stuff like that, Shalise. How fun!
There are 3 discounted spots as of now that are left. It's like $150 discount if you want to join. So link in the description and all the other stuff on our website, cultstoconsciousness.com. And until next time, leave comments if you're watching the replay. That also helps the video. We love you so much. Thanks for being here. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.